Here's a question that should make every automotive executive lose sleep at night. What happens when a company that spent decades weaving silk decides to build trucks? Apparently, they humiliate the entire off-road industry for half a century. In 1970, a Japanese manufacturer with zero four-wheel drive experience shipped a tiny truck weighing less than a modern motorcycle with a sidecar. It had a two-stroke engine making 25 horsepower. 25. That's less than a riding lawnmower produces today. The established players laughed. Land Rover had been building capable off-roaders since 1948. Toyota's Land Cruiser traced its lineage to military contracts. Jeep had literally invented the category during World War II. Within 12 months, that ridiculous little truck was outselling them all in Japan. By 1987, it was outselling the Jeep Wrangler in America by nearly 2-to-1. Not in some niche category, in the entire convertible market. The best-selling convertible in the United States wasn't a Mustang, wasn't a Corvette. It was a box on wheels from a loom company that cost 2/3 what Jeep was charging. This is motorsport heritage, and I spend way too much time thinking about vehicles that shouldn't work but somehow embarrass everything around them. If you're someone who appreciates engineering ingenuity over marketing budgets, or you've ever wondered why the biggest names in automotive sometimes get beaten by total outsiders, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now look, I need to take you back to 1887. Not because I enjoy torturing you with history lessons, but because understanding where this truck came from is the only way to appreciate just how absurd its success actually is. Michio Suzuki was born in a coastal village called Hamamatsu, about 120 miles from Tokyo. The village was known for textiles and woodworking, not engines, not chassis design, cotton and trees. At 14, Michio apprenticed under a carpenter named Kotaro Imamura. The training was brutal by any standard, 7 years of strict discipline. When the Russo-Japanese War started in 1904, demand for carpenters collapsed practically overnight. Imamura was forced to take work maintaining looms on a factory floor. He hated it, considered it beneath his skill level. His apprentice saw something completely different. Michio flourished around those machines. He watched how they worked, studied the mechanisms, found inspiration in the repetitive motion of thread becoming cloth. By 1909, at just 22 years old, he'd watched his mother struggle with her primitive hand loom, designed a pedal-driven replacement that wove cloth 10 times faster, and founded the Suzuki Loom Works. Here's what most people don't realize about this period. Suzuki wasn't dabbling. The company became genuinely excellent at weaving technology. Their sarong loom used an innovative punch card system to create patterned cloth and won national industry awards. They exported across Southeast Asia. The company went public in 1920. By the late 1930s, Michio personally held over 120 patents for loom technology. Then he decided he wanted to build cars. Now, you might be thinking this is where the automotive story actually begins. Not quite. Michio completed several car prototypes by 1939. They were decent machines, featuring liquid-cooled 4-stroke 4-cylinder engines with surprisingly modern design. But the Japanese government had other plans. They declared civilian passenger cars a non-essential commodity because there was a world war coming. The project died before it started. After the war, Suzuki went back to making looms. Then the cotton market collapsed in 1951, killing demand for weaving equipment practically overnight. The company pivoted again. Motorized bicycles first, the Power Free in 1952 with a tiny 36cc 2-stroke engine, then proper motorcycles. They finally produced their first car in 1955, the tiny Suzalite. The company formally changed its name to Suzuki Motor Company in 1954. But none of that matters for this story. This is where it gets really interesting. In the late 1960s, Suzuki's engineering team was studying a vehicle called the Steyr-Puch Haflinger, small Austrian military off-roader, small, compact, capable, used by mountain troops. The idea was to build something similar, but even smaller, something that fit Japan's K-car regulations. K-cars had strict limits on length, width, and engine size, but owners benefited from lower taxes, cheaper insurance, and reduced registration fees. The financial incentives were significant enough that manufacturers designed entire vehicle lineups around those restrictions. Building a proper off-roader that qualified as a K-car seemed almost contradictory. Every serious four-wheel drive vehicle in the world was big and heavy. That was the consensus. That was what the data showed. Capability required mass. Then something unexpected happened. In 1968, a tiny Japanese outfit called Hope Motor Company went bankrupt. Hope had designed a small off-road vehicle called the Hope Star ON360. I need you to understand how crude this thing was. No doors, a Mitsubishi-sourced 359cc two-stroke engine making 21 horsepower. The rear axle came from a Mitsubishi Colt. The wheels came from a Mitsubishi Jeep. It was essentially a box of Mitsubishi parts sitting on a basic ladder frame. Top speed was about 43 miles per hour, dropping to 30 in four-wheel drive. Hope managed to sell about 45 of them total. That's not a monthly number. That's the entire production run, ever. 45 trucks. Mitsubishi was offered the design. They passed. Logical decision. The product had failed catastrophically. The company was bankrupt. There was no market validation whatsoever. Suzuki's director, Osamu Suzuki, saw something different.
He overcame fierce opposition within his own company and bought the whole operation. His colleagues thought he was wasting corporate money on a failed product from a failed company. The internal pushback was significant. This wasn't some minor disagreement. People genuinely believed he was making a mistake that could damage the company's reputation. He wasn't wrong about the opposition. He was wrong about their assessment. The engineering challenge Suzuki's team now faced was deceptively simple on paper and enormously difficult in practice. Build a real four-wheel drive vehicle with a proper transfer case, low-range gearing, solid axles, and a ladder frame chassis, but make it small enough and light enough to qualify as a key car. That meant staying under 3 meters in total length, under 1.3 meters wide, engine displacement under 360 cubic centimeters. Here's the thing. Every single competitor building serious off-road vehicles was heading in the exact opposite direction. Land Rover was getting bigger with each model. Toyota's Land Cruiser was growing heavier and more powerful. Jeep had been scaling up since the original wartime Willys. The entire global off-road industry operated on one assumption that nobody questioned. Capability requires size, weight, and power. You want to go further off-road, you need a bigger truck with a bigger engine. Suzuki looked at that consensus and rejected it completely. Their engineers argued the opposite position. A light vehicle doesn't need a big engine to climb a steep grade. A narrow vehicle can thread through forest trails that stop wider trucks cold. A short wheelbase can negotiate tight switchbacks that leave longer vehicles stuck at impossible angles. Weight was the enemy of off-road performance, not the foundation of it. Think about it like this. Imagine trying to walk across a frozen pond. Would you rather weigh 150 pounds or 300 pounds? The lighter person distributes less pressure per square inch. They float across surfaces that crack and swallow heavier loads. The same physics apply to soft sand, deep mud, loose snow. Suzuki took the Hope Star chassis, threw out the Mitsubishi engine, and installed their own air-cooled 359 cubic centimeter two-stroke twin cylinder making 25 horsepower. They redesigned the body from scratch. They kept the ladder frame because it was sound engineering, not because they lacked imagination. They added a proper part-time four-wheel drive system with a dedicated transfer case offering both high and low-range gearing. Selected by a physical lever in the cabin between the gearbox lever and the handbrake. No electronics, no computer, just mechanical connection between driver intention and wheel output. They fitted leaf springs and solid beam axles front and rear, the same fundamental suspension architecture as the full-size Land Rover and Toyota Land Cruiser, vehicles that weighed 3 or 4 times more. The technology wasn't primitive. It was deliberately chosen for its off-road advantages. And to keep the total length under 3 meters, they mounted the spare tire inside the vehicle behind the front seats. This made it a 3-seater, but it preserved the K-car classification and its financial benefits. Tax savings trumped a 4th seat. Practical engineering decisions, not arbitrary compromises. In April 1970, the LJ10 rolled off the line. LJ stood for Light Jeep. Subtle naming there, Suzuki, real subtle.
It weighed 590 kilograms, about 1,300 pounds. For context, that's less than a modern superbike with a sidecar. It had 16-inch wheels and a top speed of 47 miles per hour. It looked like someone had put a Land Rover in the dryer on high heat. And it was the first four-wheel drive K-car to enter series production anywhere in the world. Now, you might be thinking that's a nice achievement for a niche Japanese market, but what does that have to do with the global industry? Fair question. The domestic success was just the beginning. The entire first year of production was done by hand because Suzuki hadn't expected real demand. They figured maybe a few hundred units, maybe 1,000 if things went well. Conservative projections based on the Hope Star's catastrophic sales history. They were spectacularly wrong. 5,000 units sold domestically in year one, outselling the Mitsubishi Jeep in Japan. The vehicle that Mitsubishi had declined to build was now beating Mitsubishi's own product on home territory, using technology Mitsubishi had deemed worthless. The irony was structural. Suzuki scrambled to set up a proper assembly line. They never stopped improving the platform. 1972 brought the LJ20 with a water-cooled engine and, crucially, left-hand drive variants for export. That was the signal. Global ambitions announced without press releases. A U.S. company called International Equipment Corporation imported a few thousand of these early Jimnys, selling about 3,500 units, mostly in California, Nevada, and Arizona. Not a sensation by any measure, but a proof of concept. Americans would buy a tiny Japanese four-wheel drive if the price was right. By 1975, the LJ50 arrived with a larger 539cc three-cylinder engine, initially targeting Australia. Then the LJ80 got an 800cc four-cylinder. The platform was evolving, growing, but staying true to its core philosophy: light, simple, capable, cheap. The second generation launched in 1981 with a redesigned chassis, improved road behavior, and a 970cc four-cylinder. Body styles multiplied: convertibles, hardtops, pickups, five-door wagons. Different markets got different names. Australia got it as the Sierra. Spain's Santana Motors assembled them locally with softened suspension and cloth interiors for European buyers who wanted something between rugged and comfortable. In India, Maruti Suzuki produced it as the Gypsy for military and police applications. The Indian Army still uses them, decades later, because the platform works. The Jimny was everywhere: Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, Europe. It was becoming one of the most widely distributed vehicles on the planet, not through massive marketing budgets or dealer incentive programs, through word of mouth, through capability that exceeded expectations, through owners who took them places that were supposed to be impossible and came back with stories. And then Suzuki decided to take on America properly. In 1985, the second-generation Jimny arrived in U.S. showrooms wearing a new name: the Suzuki Samurai. The branding was calculated. Americans responded to warrior imagery. The name suggested capability without requiring explanation. It packed a 1.3-liter four-cylinder making 63 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 16.9 seconds, quarter mile in about 20.5 seconds. Those aren't performance numbers, those are patience numbers. You didn't buy this truck to win stoplight races. You bought it because you wanted to go places other trucks couldn't reach. The Samurai had manual locking front hubs, a 2-speed transfer case with real low-range gearing, leaf springs, solid axles, and a ladder frame chassis, genuine off-road hardware. At $6,200 base price, a loaded one ran about $7,500. The Jeep Wrangler started north of $9,000. Suzuki had undercut the most famous name in off-roading by a full third, and they were clever about the rollout. Dealerships in California, Florida, and Georgia first, markets where outdoor recreation was embedded in the culture, where people actually used their trucks for something beyond grocery runs. Every Samurai shipped with a full accessories catalog: roof racks, bumper guards, upgraded wheels, light bars, brush bars. Suzuki understood something about the American market that many foreign companies missed entirely. Americans don't just buy off-road trucks, they personalize them, they make them their own. They want ownership to feel like expression. Giving customers the ability to customize at the point of purchase was a strategic masterstroke. The truck wasn't just transportation, it was a platform for identity. Suzuki planned for 1,200 imports per month. Conservative projections again, reasonable expectations based on their previous limited success. They sold 47,000 in the first calendar year. By mid-1988, they were moving 8,000 units per month, 150,000 sold in 3 years. The Samurai became the best-selling convertible in the United States, not the best-selling off-roader, the best-selling convertible, period, beating everything from sports cars to luxury cruisers. It also captured the best first-year sales record of any Japanese car company entering the American market, a record that stood for years. And in 1987, it outsold the Jeep Wrangler by nearly 2-to-1. A loom company from Hamamatsu was beating Jeep at Jeep's own game, in Jeep's home market, with a truck that cost 2/3 the price and made half the power. Here's what most people don't realize about why this worked. The physics of off-road capability don't care about brand heritage or marketing budgets. They care about weight, geometry, and mechanical advantage. The Samurai had all three working in its favor while competitors were chasing specifications that looked impressive on paper but performed worse in the dirt. Start with weight. The Samurai tipped the scales at about 2,300 pounds. The contemporary Jeep Wrangler weighed closer to 3,000. That 700-pound gap is the difference between floating across soft ground and digging into it. Think about walking on fresh snow. A person wearing snowshoes distributes their weight across a larger surface area. They stay on top. Someone in regular boots punches through with every step, exhausting, inefficient, eventually impossible. Lighter vehicles exert less pressure per square inch on the terrain beneath them. They ride over surfaces that swallow heavier trucks. They need less power to climb the same grade because they're hauling less mass against gravity. They're easier to extract when stuck because there's simply less vehicle to move. 63 horsepower pulling 2,300 pounds has a better power-to-weight ratio per unit of resistance than 112 horsepower hauling 3,000 pounds through deeper ruts. The math actually favors the smaller engine when you account for how much harder the heavier vehicle is working just to move itself. The ladder frame chassis underpinned everything structural about the Jimny's capability. Unlike unibody construction, where the body panels are load-bearing structural elements, the Jimny sits on a separate steel ladder frame. 2 parallel rails running the length of the vehicle, with cross members connecting them. Simple, strong, proven across decades of off-road applications. Here's the thing about ladder frames that most people miss. They can flex and twist over uneven ground without cracking body panels, popping windows, or causing structural failure. The frame absorbs the stress. The body just goes along for the ride. Hit a rock with the body, and you've dented sheet metal. The frame underneath is fine. The structural integrity remains completely intact. This is why you see old Jimnys with battered, dented, scratched bodies still running perfectly decades later. The damage is cosmetic. The skeleton underneath has survived everything thrown at it. Unibody vehicles don't have this luxury. Stress the structure and you're stressing the actual load-bearing components. Cracks propagate. Alignment shifts. What started as a dent becomes a structural compromise that affects everything from door fitment to suspension geometry. Solid beam axles at both ends gave the Samurai genuine wheel articulation. This is the single biggest advantage over independent suspension in off-road conditions, and it's the one that most people don't understand until they've experienced both systems in challenging terrain. When one wheel on a solid axle climbs over an obstacle, the opposite wheel on the same axle is pushed down toward the ground. The axle acts like a seesaw. One side goes up, the other side goes down. This maintains tire contact with the terrain. Independent suspension, which almost every modern crossover and many modern SUVs use, lets each wheel move separately. Great for highway comfort, terrible for keeping traction on broken ground. When an independently suspended wheel drops into a hole, the opposite wheel doesn't compensate. It just stays where it is while you lose contact area. Suddenly, you've got a wheel spinning uselessly in the air while the opposite tire can't generate enough traction to compensate. The vehicle that looked more sophisticated on the showroom floor is now stuck while the primitive solid axle truck drives past. Now, you might be thinking that modern electronic traction control systems solve this problem. They help, but they're applying braking force to spinning wheels and redirecting torque. They're managing a compromise, not eliminating the fundamental geometric disadvantage. A wheel in contact with the ground will always outperform a wheel being electronically managed while dangling in space. The two-speed transfer case was the real multiplier that made 63 horsepower genuinely competitive. High range for normal rear-wheel drive operation on pavement, 4 high for all-wheel traction on slippery surfaces like wet roads or loose gravel, 4 low for serious terrain where you need maximum mechanical advantage. In low range, the effective torque delivered to the wheels roughly doubled while speed halved. This is the part most people miss when they laugh at the horsepower figure. They're thinking about highway merging and stoplight acceleration. They're not thinking about climbing a 40-degree rock face at walking pace. Run that modest 63 horsepower output through low range and first gear simultaneously, and the force reaching the tires was more than enough for steep rock faces, deep mud, and river crossings. The engine wasn't struggling, it was operating exactly where it was designed to operate, spinning at efficient RPMs while the gearing did the heavy lifting. Horsepower is an overrated metric for off-road work. What actually moves a vehicle over obstacles is torque multiplication through gearing. The Samurai's transfer case had a lower final drive ratio in 4 low than the Wrangler system, meaning it could operate at even slower, more controlled speeds on technical terrain before needing to shift. Slower is better when you're navigating obstacles. It gives you time to read the terrain, time to adjust, time to back off before you're committed to a line that ends badly. The Samurai's compact dimensions created geometry that worked decisively in its favor. Short wheelbase, narrow track width, almost no front or rear overhang beyond the wheels. This translated to steep approach, departure, and breakover angles. Those measurements define what inclines a vehicle can tackle without dragging its bumpers or getting high-centered on ridgelines. The Samurai could climb steeper inclines without the front bumper plowing into the hillside. It could descend sharper drops without the rear end catching and pivoting the vehicle. It could crest ridgelines without getting hung up at the center while both axles dangled uselessly. Bigger, longer vehicles with their lower bumpers and extended wheelbases routinely got stuck on terrain the Samurai could skip across without drama. The trails through dense forest that stopped full-size trucks cold were highways for something narrow enough to fit between the trees. Experienced off-roaders figured this out quickly. Size isn't always an advantage in the woods. The vehicle that fits through the gap is the one that gets to the other side. The vehicle that's too wide just sits there while the driver walks home. The engine itself was deliberately, intentionally simple. No turbocharger to fail at altitude or overheat during sustained low-speed climbs. No complex electronic fuel injection system to malfunction during water crossings or throw error codes in remote locations. No computers managing the four-wheel drive engagement. Every critical system was mechanical. A physical lever engaged four-wheel drive. Manual locking hubs required the driver to get out and physically turn a dial on the wheel hub. If something broke in the backcountry, a basic toolkit and some mechanical intuition could get you home. This is where it gets really interesting for high-altitude applications. At extreme elevations, where fuel injection systems stumble in thin air, the Samurai's simple carburetor could be rejetted in a parking lot by anyone with a screwdriver and the right jet kit. Thinner air means less oxygen. Less oxygen means the fuel mixture runs rich. Rich mixtures waste fuel and reduce power. Electronic fuel injection compensates automatically up to a point, but the systems have limits. The sensors have ranges. Push beyond them and the computer starts making compromises that hurt performance. A carburetor is just mechanical. Swap the jets for ones with smaller holes, lean out the mixture manually, and the engine runs properly at elevations that would leave sophisticated systems struggling to adapt. Which brings us to perhaps the single greatest humiliation the Jimny ever delivered to a major corporation. In 2007, Chrysler was launching the new JK generation Jeep Wrangler, Some enthusiasts were skeptical about the four-door configuration and the replacement of the beloved inline six-cylinder with a new V6. Jeep wanted a statement, a spectacle, something that would put the Wrangler back on top of the capability conversation and silence the critics. So Chrysler built two modified Wrangler Unlimited Rubicons, fitted them with Goodyear MTR tires, winches, and electronic altitude measurement equipment. They hired German expedition leader Matthias Jeschke and his professional extreme events team. Factory support, corporate backing, professional logistics. The target was Ojos del Salado, the highest active volcano in the world, sitting on the Argentina-Chile border at 22,615 feet above sea level, higher than any mountain in North America, higher than anything in Europe, a legitimate extreme environment where the air holds barely half the oxygen available at sea level. The climb took 5 days. Hurricane-strength winds, temperatures dropping to -22 degrees Fahrenheit, punishing high-altitude glacier traverses across sheer ice, air thin enough to make thinking difficult and physical exertion dangerous. The Jeeps reached 21,842 feet above sea level. A legitimate, hard-won achievement. The vehicles performed, the team executed. Jeschke declared the Wranglers unbeatable for high-altitude driving. At Jeep's direction, his team erected a sign at the high point. The sign read, "Jeep parking only. All others don't make it up here anyway." Chrysler issued a glowing press release calling it proof that the new Wranglers stood apart from all other four-wheel drives. Marketing made the most of every photo, every video clip, every quote from the expedition team. This was supposed to cement the Wrangler's position at the top of the capability hierarchy. The record lasted about 3 weeks. Two local Chileans from the Atacama region had been planning their own attempt. Gonzalo Bravo and Eduardo Canales weren't backed by a corporation. They didn't have professional logistics teams or factory-modified vehicles. They didn't have press releases prepared or marketing departments waiting to amplify the success. Their vehicle was a 1986 Suzuki Samurai, 21 years old at the time. Bravo had modified it himself in his own workshop. Stronger axles to handle the stress, lower gear ratios for the extreme grades, air lockers for maximum traction, larger tires for better ground clearance, a supercharged G16A four-cylinder to compensate for the altitude. But still a Samurai. Still the platform that was designed from its very first generation to be the cheapest four-wheel drive you could buy. First attempt came on January 1st, 2007. A snowstorm forced them to turn back. Conditions were simply too dangerous to continue. Second attempt a month later. The engine caught fire at 20,731 feet when a hydraulic reservoir failed and sprayed fluid onto the hot exhaust manifold. They towed the burning truck back down the volcano, repaired it, went again. Look, that's commitment that goes beyond enthusiasm. That's obsession with proving a point. On April 21st, 2007, Bravo and Canales drove their Samurai past the Jeep team's high point and kept climbing. They stopped at 21,942 feet, 138 feet higher than the factory-funded expedition with its professional support team and corporate backing. On the way down, they found the Jeep parking-only sign lying flat, blown over by the Andean winds. They picked it up and brought it home as a souvenir. Guinness certified the record in July. Two guys in a 21-year-old budget truck, self-funded with no professional support team, had beaten Jeep on the highest active volcano on Earth. That is an embarrassment that no amount of marketing spend can erase. The Samurai's American story has a dark chapter, though. In June of 1988, Consumer Reports published a review with a headline designed to destroy sales. Warning, the Suzuki Samurai rolls over too easily. During their proprietary short-course avoidance maneuver, the Samurai tipped onto two wheels. The magazine gave it a not acceptable rating, the first vehicle to receive that designation in a decade. Sales collapsed, from roughly 72,000 annually to about 2,000. The Samurai was discontinued in America by 1995. But here's what most people don't realize about that test. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration later criticized Consumer Reports' testing methodology because of driver variation. NHTSA used robotic controllers in their own rollover resistance tests, specifically to minimize human inconsistency. Suzuki filed a lawsuit alleging manipulation. Evidence suggested the test course was modified after a senior Consumer Reports executive, who was not a trained test driver, managed to tip the vehicle during an informal drive. The testing allegedly evolved from evaluation into an effort to force a rollover on camera. The 2004 settlement included a joint statement acknowledging Consumer Reports never intended to imply the Samurai easily rolled in routine driving. Government studies confirmed its real-world rollover rates fell within normal ranges for comparable utility vehicles. The modern Jeep Wrangler currently has the second-worst rollover probability among SUVs tested. Nobody ran that story with the same energy. While headlines destroyed the Samurai in America, the Jimny thrived everywhere else. Third generation arrived in 1998 with coil springs replacing leaf springs, smoother ride, better articulation, still the ladder frame, still the solid axles, still the transfer case with low range, still simple, still cheap. The fourth generation launched in 2018 and the world went completely insane. Suzuki set a sales target of 15,000 units for Japan's first year. Orders crossed that number in 30 days. Waiting lists in the UK hit a full year. In Southeast Asia, they stretched to multiple years. Used fourth-generation Jimnys routinely sell above their original retail price. In Australia, dealer markups of $10,000 became standard. 500 units allocated for a new batch sold out in 5 hours. When the 5-door Jimny arrived in Japan in April 2025, over 50,000 reservations came in within 4 days. The waiting list stretches to 4 years. A vehicle designed to be cheap has become so desirable that people pay premiums just to skip the queue. And somehow, the vehicle is still unavailable in the United States. Federal crash worthiness standards, mandatory advanced driver assistance systems, and pedestrian impact protection rules keep it off American roads. The country where the Samurai once outsold the Jeep Wrangler 2-to-1 cannot legally buy the modern version. The irony cuts deep. The Jimny proved something the established off-road industry didn't want to hear. You don't need bigger to get more capable. You need smarter about weight, simplicity, and geometry. Every generation of Land Rover grew heavier and more expensive until the Defender became a luxury product north of $50,000. The Toyota Land Cruiser evolved into a $70,000 premium SUV. Jeep filled the Wrangler with screens and electronic assists. The Jimny stayed small, stayed mechanical, stayed cheap, kept going everywhere the expensive trucks went, frequently further, because it weighed half as much and fit through gaps they couldn't enter. A loom manufacturer bought a bankrupt company's failed prototype that sold 45 units total, built something smaller and lighter and cheaper than anything the market thought viable, spent 55 years embarrassing companies with 10 times the budget and decades more experience. 3 million trucks, 194 countries, 4 generations, people still waiting 4 years to buy one. That's the Suzuki Jimny. A truck so cheap it shouldn't work, and so capable it stole Jeep's altitude record on the highest volcano on Earth. If you've driven one, owned one, or spent years on a waiting list that outlasts some marriages, drop your story in the comments. If you made it this far, hit subscribe. We do this every 2 days.